A lantern breaks the dark, and its circle of light catches the edge of a copper shape lying on the seabed, like a sleeping animal. Another, then another, until the sand seems paved with metal. The diver hovers over a field of copper ingots, and the past begins to speak. This is the Uluburun shipwreck off southern Turkey from the late 14th century BCE. It rests roughly 50 meters down, quiet now, but once it moved through a busy sea. And the core idea of this case file is simple. One sunk ship reveals a whole network. Uluburun is a snapshot of Aegean Levant trade at full stretch. Its cargo is not one thing but many things, carefully chosen and tightly packed. Because of that mix, we can trace routes across islands and coasts without a single written itinerary. First, the copper. Most of the metal lies in oxhide ingots, a cast slab with 4 corner lugs that resembles a stretched animal skin, shaped so a person could lash and lift it. These were the standard shipping form for copper, and there were hundreds of them. Alongside the copper was tin. Not as much, but enough to matter, since bronze is copper plus tin in a rough 10-to-1 proportion, which meant this cargo did not just serve markets, it carried the ingredients of an industry. Next came glass ingots, already colored, blue, turquoise, sometimes a honey tone. This was glass as a raw material, ready to be reheated and shaped in workshops far from where it was made. It tells us that knowledge and color recipes traveled as confidently as stone and metal. There was ivory, both elephant and hippopotamus, worked and unworked. There were tusks and inlays and raw plaques, the cool white luxury of the age. Ivory moves with power, which hints at customers close to courts and palaces. There were resins sealed in Canaanite jars, likely terebinth, sticky, fragrant, and useful as incense, varnish, and medicine. A ship that carries resins carries scent, ritual, and repair. These jars also worked as containers for other goods, so the jars themselves are part of the system. We can add ebony logs, ostrich eggshells cut into bowls, beads of faience and amber, and a shelf of personal items and tools. Scales and stone weights tucked among the cargo speak a language of measures and trust. If copper was the bulk and tin the key, then glass, ivory, and resin were the bright threads that made the bundle profitable. Now think about routes. Copper in this era often came from Cyprus, the island sitting like a hinge in the eastern Mediterranean. Tin is trickier. Its sources were scattered and later argued over. But the very presence of tin on this deck implies long reach eastward or northward through intermediaries. The jars and resins point to Levantine ports, places like Ugarit or Byblos, where merchants brokered goods and information. The glass colors suggest workshops with Egyptian or Syro-Mesopotamian techniques, and the tableware and trinkets on board include Aegean styles, which means the ship was likely heading west toward Mycenaean buyers. Therefore, the ship's track makes a triangle in water, Levant to Cyprus to the Aegean, with side trips whenever profit beckoned. It is not a single lane but a braided route, changing with winds and contracts. Because of that, one wreck can sketch the shape of many journeys. We should pause on how the ship was built, because technique is a trade route too. The hull was assembled shell first, with planks locked edge to edge by tight joinery, then reinforced, a hallmark of skilled Mediterranean shipwrights. Craft moves across borders when merchants insist on reliable boats. Who owned this voyage? We can read both palace and merchant in the details, which is the point. In the late Bronze Age, palatial and private interests overlapped. Rulers exchanged gifts while traders skimmed margins, and sometimes the same cargo served both forms of exchange. The cargo mass gives scale, around 20 tons in all, heavy enough to demand a careful load plan and many hands. That weight also signals financing, because someone had to front capital, pledge repayment, and spread risk. Ships like this were moving banks. Because copper dominated, some scholars see Uluburun as a bronze factory in motion. But the presence of resins, glass, and luxury items argues for a multi-stop itinerary where different ports peeled off what they needed. If one harbor bought copper, another might prize glass, and a third might only want scented resin and eggshell bowls for a ritual feast. There is an exception worth noting. If storms or politics closed a port, the route could flex, and a cargo meant for 5 buyers might end up in 3. The network was resilient, but it was not invulnerable. Evidence of Egypt rides quietly on this deck too. A single gold scarab carries a royal name, a reminder that elite symbols travel in the same ships as merchant goods. This is how influence works at sea. Power masquerades as jewelry and rides with copper. We should define one more idea in plain words. A palace economy is a system where rulers collect goods in central storerooms and redistribute them as wages, rations, and gifts. Apply that here, and you see why standardized weights and jars matter. They let palaces and merchants speak the same accounting language. Therefore, Uluburun is both a marketplace and a ledger. What remains uncertain should be labeled and then left. We do not know the ship's exact home port or final destination with certainty. We also cannot trace every object to its original maker, and we do not need to for the main point to stand. Now return to the bronze recipe. The 10-to-1 balance of copper to tin is not just chemistry, it is root design. Because tin was scarce and copper abundant, trade had to bridge that gap, and ships like this were the bridge. The presence of raw glass tells a similar story. Colorants and techniques were guarded, yet the material still traveled, which means trusted relationships navigated secrets. That trust often moved in families, guilds, and partnerships that crossed languages and gods. Ivory and ebony chart a southern line into Africa and back up through Levantine brokers. Ostrich eggshells, delicate but plentiful, suggest steady contacts with desert edges. Each item is a breadcrumb that points from hull to hinterland. Because we can weigh, count, and compare these items, Uluburun is not just a story, but a data set. More than 100 jars stacked like honeycombs tell us about volume. Ingot shapes tell us about handling. Weights reveal standards. Archaeology meets logistics, and the numbers make the map. What sank the ship is less important than what it carried, and the record does not insist on one cause. Rocks, storms, or human error all fit the evidence, and the sea rarely writes confessions. What matters is the silence after, and what that silence preserved. Finally, what does this wreck tell us about the Aegean and the Levant as a system? First, the late Bronze Age Mediterranean was integrated by routine, not by empire. Ports cooperated because profit rewarded habit. Next, the mix of bulk metals and elite luxuries shows that economies can braid the needs of workshops with the desires of courts. There is a boundary condition to remember. If a narrow strait closed or a kingdom failed to pay, a ship like this still sailed, just with different buyers, which is resilience. But if several links failed at once, the same network could become brittle, which is fragility. Uluburun therefore stands as both proof and warning. Proof that one vessel could knit Cyprus, Canaan, Egypt, and the Aegean into a working market for metals, scents, colors, and prestige. Warning that the wealth of an age can ride low in the water on a single wooden hull. When the diver's lantern met those copper ingots, he met a ledger in metal. He met roots etched by wind patterns, contracts sealed with resin, and workshops humming far away. He met a map drawn not with ink, but with weight. The memorable takeaway is this: Uluburun shows how one loss can map an entire economy, because networks leave their signatures in cargo, and a single ship can carry a whole world of connections. If this case file lit a spark, like and subscribe for more.